Good afternoon. I'm Malcolm Davis, and I am so pleased to be here with you all today. I'm the president of AIA Charlotte for 2021, and we're happy to have a fantastic, intimate conversation with Chancellor Sharon Gaber and Ken Lambla, our esteemed member and former dean, who will be retiring very soon. We're so happy that they have agreed to enlighten us and sit down to sort of chat about life, the Chancellor's new experience here in Charlotte and our region. And we're just tickled pink to have this conversation. We've got two folks with incredibly esteemed careers. They're doing exciting work, and we're looking forward to the activity that's before them. Ken in particular has some interesting activity post career, and we think he'll be taking a pretty long bike ride here in a few days, and so we're happy to catch him and have a conversation before he does that. And we're just so pleased and happy that you've been willing to sort of share some time with us prior to your trip and to help us to get to know the Chancellor quite a bit better. Myself, as many of you know, but perhaps some don't, again, I'm the 2021 president, but I work with Perkins & Will, and I've worked in Charlotte for 25 years with esteemed architects here, and have had a fantastic experience working in the cultural space, civic space, and higher ed. I personally have a passion for engagement, meaningful conversations, travel, and frankly, just being outside and away from the office. AIA Charlotte is a huge organization. We have just under 1,000 members within our region. We cover 12 counties, and we have over 50 member firms. Our mission is to serve our members, advance their value, and we want to improve the quality of the built environment, both for members but also for the clients that we serve. We have an active volunteer board and committee. We have intentional interest in key issues around the area, but specifically for climate health, climate sustainability, thoughtful development, civic engagement, active policy, and we want to strive, and we continue to strive, particularly these last couple of years, to improve diversity and inclusion in practice, but in our community. We represent an incredible group of practitioners and planners, associates, partners. North Carolina and the Charlotte region have grown exponentially. And the work that you see, the cranes that you see swinging in this community, have the work of architects behind it. And we are proud to say that with our partners in the CM community and elsewhere, that we have completed several $1 billion worth of construction and work as a group over the last 5 years. If you look back 10 to 15, the impact is even greater. Today, our program will be just about as casual as we can expect, and we hope, but we really want to forge and foster a relationship that we already have with the university, particularly with the School of Architecture, to Ken's credit, but on a more broad spectrum, forging new relationships and understanding how our members can impact the university, help the university continue to grow intelligently, but to sort of be at the table and be a part of the conversation and be a resource to the Chancellor and her team as we go forward. Our structure, we'll chat until about 1 p.m. or so. We'll open up around that time for questions from you all. I think you've received in the chat that you can communicate with us through aiacharlotte@gmail.com. You send your questions there. I'll help to field those questions. And we'll stop at about 5 minutes before 1:30 or so to wrap up and close. We look forward to hearing from you all, our members, and the constituents and participants in this conversation. And we'll look for your questions, and we also have some that the board has presented, and we're going to have fun with this. We're so looking forward to it. And at this time, I'll hand it over to Ken, who will start us off.
Thank you, Malcolm. Yeah, we should have fun doing this. Actually, I'm going to take a bit of a personal moment right in the beginning. This is unscripted, so it's part of the fun. This is probably one of the last times I might address AIA Charlotte, and I just want to tell you that after my 38 years at UNC Charlotte, I think I had 20 years on the state board, 4 or 5 years on the AIA Charlotte board. I want to thank the membership. I want to thank the profession for what you do with us here at the university and me personally. And so there's quite a few people out there in the audience right now that I've known as students, I've known as partners, I've known as colleagues and as professionals, and I just want to applaud what you've accomplished. It is a very different profession than when I started, and I want to send my appreciation for what you've done with the school and the university. I'm not going to do a formal biographical sketch of Dr. Gaber, and I may call her Dr. Gaber, I may call her Sharon, and I may call her Chancellor Gaber. I'm not sure what will come out all the time, so it's sort of like the rest of the people that I know. So I'm going to start with a really simple question, Sharon.
Okay.
Where'd you grow up? How did you get on this educational path, and that led you to a terminal degree in planning from Cornell?
Thanks. And I really enjoyed hearing Malcolm talk about the AIA, but I also want to say for all that you have contributed to the university and to the community, I also want to thank you. So,
Thanks.
Yeah. So I grew up in Southern California, actually. I grew up in Pasadena. And it's kind of interesting because I don't know that I ever intended to be a planner until I was a junior in college. I went to Occidental College and small liberal arts school, and I took an urban economics course, which actually sort of opened my eyes to planning. I had taken architectural history. My urban planning class actually was taught by an adjunct who was the urban design critic for the Los Angeles Times, which was very interesting. So I would say that all of a sudden this world of planning opened up for me, and I thought, okay, this captivated my interest. I will tell you that same professor on the first day of class said, "Sharon, you're the only girl in this class. If you want to drop, you can." And I said, "What?" So I actually really dedicated myself to the class, did very well, and it turned out to be the beginning of this journey that I continued on. So
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. There's something when Sharon and I met a week ago, we both shared the fact, and that's reinforced by that story, that my own background in architecture also included a kind of stimulus from a planning instructor, the only planning instructor at the University of Kansas, who kind of opened my eyes to the social impact of the built environment. And I stayed with that track and actually went on in graduate school, both at NC State and at Berkeley, because they had planning programs. So we share a lot of that kind of work. What were some of your early employment work in the planning arena then? And how would you describe it? Was it economic policy related? Was it physical planning, infrastructure?
yeah, great question. I am not a designer, so I will own that to everybody. So, and you don't want me to be. I started out actually, so I started my master's degree, and then I worked for the city of Long Beach, and both in planning and zoning, and then I worked in economic development. Did both of those, and while I was there, realized I actually liked doing research and being a professor. So I went on to get my Ph.D. at Cornell. And I can tell you the planning director for the city of Long Beach, when I said I was leaving to get my Ph.D., he said, "Well, that's a real waste." And I said, "Well, okay, thanks." But, and I understand that from a city planning department, that is a perspective. So went from Southern California to Ithaca, New York. And if you think about Cornell's planning program, it's in a College of Art, Architecture, and Planning.
Right.
And I mean, interestingly though, all are very separated in different sections of the building. I know that we coexisted and I had friends in all the other programs, but they were very isolated and somewhat more policy oriented in the planning area.
Right, right.
You know, did that, and that was great. My first tenure track job was the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, Nebraska. And of course, from this California native to, you know, somebody who had been in New York, and I did my dissertation in New York City and this sort of thing, and then went to Lincoln, Nebraska. And that was a College of Architecture and small planning program, and really it was architecture and planning. They wound up adding interior design to it after, sort of as I was there and toward the end that I was there. But it was a great experience. We did a lot more collaboratively. The chair of the department had degrees in both planning and architecture, so you know, lots of experience there. And I went on to be the A. Lester Hyde Professor of Architecture, but it was architecture and planning there. So did that, and from Nebraska then went to Auburn University and started out as the Associate Dean of the College of Architecture, Design, and Construction, which was a new mix, having sort of the construction management within the college. That was interesting. And again, did lots of work collaboratively, both with landscape architecture and architecture. Went from there into the provost's office at Auburn, and then from there went to University of Arkansas, which has, you know, there the Fay Jones School of Architecture. So, I mean, you know, the nice thing is, as you say it, and I hope everybody knows, I have a great appreciation, understanding, and collaborative working relationship with architects throughout my career, which I don't know that every chancellor has, and part of that is just my background. We've done sort of collaborative intro-level courses that spanned all of the design curriculum, even starting back at Nebraska as they were working on doing that, so that even graduate planning students could be a part of that, just because everybody needs sort of a fundamental level of understanding.
So I hope everyone's standing and applauding at this point, because we have a chancellor who has very specific experience at some very renowned architecture programs across the country and in very different parts of the country: Ithaca, New York, Lincoln, Nebraska, Fayetteville, Arkansas, and Auburn, and now she's here in Charlotte. And I truly hope that as the years go on in your tenure here, that your relationship with this profession is going to be robust. But your explanation of that path causes me to ask, so were there specific things in any or all of those that you sought to then extend because you had an understanding of what architects do in principle? How'd that play out?
Yes and no, and I think some of that, I do want to mention, I didn't mention my last stop, which was as the president at the University of Toledo. Does not have an architecture program, so I didn't want to leave that out, but also...
But they have a great glass building in Toledo that I bet a lot of people in the audience have been to.
They do, and by the way, I was on the museum board, so I was, the Glass Museum is a part of the Toledo Museum of Art, and I was on that board, which was it's a wonderful museum, and the glass pavilion across the street is wonderful.
Fantastic.
Yes.
And it's across the street from Geary's art school as an extension of the museum there. So there's all kinds of architecture there.
But by the way, that art school that Geary built was the University of Toledo's building.
Oh, was it really?
The University of Toledo owns that building, and the art department is located in that
Oh, fantastic.
in that building. So when I did things with the art program, it was there. And what's interesting is people didn't realize that was the university's building, paid for and this sort of thing.
And I've been there.
So I worked to make sure there was signage put up that sort of, not on the building, because I didn't want to do anything to Geary's building, but certainly to make sure it was identified, because the university wants that positive association there also. So part of what you were asking is, did I work with and help extend? I mean, you know, all along I had great opportunities. I'll start with sort of at Auburn, and you know, we talked briefly about the rural studio. So Sharon comes into that college, is a part of it, and it was sort of an interesting thing because I was hired as the associate dean of that college and worked my way up to interim provost of the university.
Who was the dean at the time?
Dan Bennett.
Dan Bennett, of course.
And right, so and Dan Bennett had been at Arkansas, so did a
That's
little reverse thing. But
Right.
so Dan was there. He hired me, and he said, "Well, Sharon, you've got a little bit of an uphill battle." I said, "Why?" He's like, "Because our college doesn't think they need an associate dean, and people aren't gonna." and so it was just kind of interesting because I came in and just helped and continued to help with various things that helped push things forward. So by the time I got to Auburn, Sam Mockabee had passed away.
Oh, okay.
D.K. Ruth was running the rural studio, and D.K. has now passed away, but
Right.
D.K. Actually he was a big ideas kind of guy. So, he had work that he wanted to do in the rural studio area. Now, Andrew Freer is the person who is actually located there, but he was, DK was the person back on campus. DK also put together a design build degree program,
Okay.
which of course then I got to help him with because he didn't really care about administration. It didn't, it doesn't matter how I have to do it, I just want it done.
Right.
So I got to help with
That's
that.
an endemic
That's
characteristic of architects.
So I got to help with that. But then I also got to spend time out sort of in the community because part of it was, okay, the students and the architecture students are doing these amazing things in this rural region of Alabama, but the planners weren't involved at all. And really, in my mind, it was like, okay, lights, how do we help actually with the community building and the projects that they were doing in, whether it was a firehouse, whether it was housing, whether it was a park or a baseball field, or you think about all of the projects that they'd done. So then, they actually got into work associated with economic development and how do we create sustainable job opportunities and this sort of thing. So that was exciting just to think about and continue to think about funding models and where that's coming from and how that sustains itself. So
Nebraska also, or not Nebraska, but Arkansas also has a very active community studio. I think they're currently working on a pavilion that's going to the Biennale in Venice. But they've done a number of projects in and around Arkansas, not strictly in Arkansas. Were you involved with them as well at all?
I should not take any ownership or credit in saying that I was involved. I certainly helped in a number of ways from the provost's office. So, I mean, Steve Luoni runs the sort of community design center, and then Marlon Blackwell, when I was first there, was the department chair. There were various times, going back to my earlier comment, when he'd decide, I don't want to be an administrator anymore, and this is sort of cramping what I'm doing. Both of them became distinguished professors while I was there. Certainly, I take credit for part of that. They did all the work, and I had the honor of helping to make sure that they received that recognition. And then Marlon, part of it was making sure he understood how he could do the great work he was doing and had the support in place. I also then had the good fortune of hiring Peter McKeith, who came to Arkansas from Washington University. So, and that was, I did do that actually. So I could take credit
Peter's
for that.
the current dean.
He is the current dean and has been, at this point, he's been there for a while because I've been gone from there for a while.
It's great.
Yeah.
So let's stay with Arkansas for a minute, because one of the things that you really focused on at Arkansas was sort of the elevation of the institution to a very high research category. I don't expect all the architects to know what that means, but it actually does affect an architecture program in very different ways than training people to practice a profession. It demands an outlook towards external funding. It demands a connectivity nationally and internationally to research initiatives. these days, quite often it demands a level of collaboration and interdisciplinary work between architects and many other fields. I know here at UNCC we have several faculty members working with electrical engineering on some new algae-based electronic generating work. We've got work going on with geology. We've got work going on with mechanical engineering and sustainability arenas. You know, so overall at Arkansas, what were the major thrusts of your effort to reach that higher level of research productivity?
Well, so I'll talk a
And
little
not
bit
strictly in architecture.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit overall, and then of course architecture more specifically. Part of that university, and I think there are similarities to what we're talking about here as we're in the strategic planning process. We're putting together a strategic plan for the next 10 years, and it was done really in a participatory way. What are the things that the campus thinks we might want to do as we have an eye for the next 10 years? Right. And I think our campus community said, we aspire to have better recognition and to move up in our sort of classification as a research university. And you probably know we had record research funding last year. Right. Right. So that's a real positive. I think as we talk about it here, the concept isn't that this is going to happen in 1 year or 2 years, and maybe not in 5 years, but as we have a 10-year plan, sort of laying it out there that this is an aspiration for us. And collectively, we've got to think about what that looks like. So at Arkansas, it was really having research and sponsored programs, which is a unit on campus, begin to think about, okay, how do we recognize we need everybody to be a part of it? So, you know, as you think about architecture, which isn't typically a unit that gets a lot of external research funding.
Right, right.
But part of what I'd say is we know that engineering will, in fact, continue to grow in their research funding. And your point about the collaborative work, critically important. And having somebody who has the eye of how you design in a different way or how you begin to think about things. So we did a lot more collaborative and interdisciplinary work together. And I was listening to Malcom earlier and talking about tours of buildings before we started this, and I had the
I'm sure you could be invited on one of those
well,
tours
you
if
know,
you'd like.
we'll see. But I went and visited a construction site locally here, and they were talking about it being a well building. And sort of thinking about back in the day, and I was back at Auburn when everything was, people were talking about LEED certification and wanting to move in that direction, and now there's well building certification.
Right, right.
I mean, so what is that natural evolution for what buildings look like? And then what's the research that comes out of it? Because people are going to want to know, what's the outcome if we're going to make that investment? What does that mean for our employees, and what does that mean? And quite honestly, we all know after the pandemic, all of our worlds have changed, and design fundamentals won't change, but the way your eye looks at design might just a little bit, right? So I do think there's great opportunities, which was, you know, particularly at Arkansas, they were very good at making the connections across campus. They did have certainly strong linkages, like they built something on campus and it's sitting on the grounds of the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art there, which is wonderful. So, I mean, there are opportunities, but I think for us, that's what we have to think about is, whereas R1, Research 1, or, you know, we've been sort of trying to tone down the Research 1 and just refer to ourselves as wanting to move to be top tier research.
Oh, okay.
Whereas that might refer to a lot with the dollars. What it is it's recognition. And what I'd say is, for the inclusion of our College of Arts and Architecture, it's about continuing to be recognized and continuing, I at least know enough about design intelligence and looking at rankings and by the way, whereas rankings aren't something that we want to chase, they are important reputationally. And the reputation, so as your alums and this community thinks about how we are perceived, I encourage them to think about our wonderful college, because it does actually matter. And I can tell you, every school that I've been a part of looks at design intelligence rankings and says, we are so proud to be top 10, top 15, whatever it is. And I of course looked at how the college is doing, and it is well received, and it has continued to make progress, and that's a great thing. So I think
this is a reminder to the audience that design intelligence uses the input from the profession.
I know. That's
So when you're called upon, you can take Dr. Gaber's advice seriously. That's a really good thing. I think one of the great collaborations I was able to participate in here was our last entry to the Solar Decathlon competition. And I remember there's a guy named Stick Williams who was the head of the Duke Foundation. And we approached him for funding, and he listened. We played golf, and at the end of the golf match, or the golf game, he said, I'm going to give you funding for only one reason. And the reason is that you have constructed a consortium of engineering, because of the coal ash concrete research that we were doing with them, with business through marketing, and with architecture through design. And then you can add the construction industry here in Charlotte as an example. He said, without that, I just wouldn't be interested. And so it was a really wonderful partnership.
Yeah, that is
really
really
nice.
nice.
Wonderful partnership.
very nice.
So how did you, well then, with that kind of explanation of what you were able to do in Arkansas, why did you go to Toledo? And what were the kind of 3 or 4 different things that you felt you could really, accelerate at Toledo?
Well, so I was the provost at Arkansas, and I had the good fortune of working with a chancellor there. He hired me. He had not been a typical academic, and whereas I had been from assistant professor, working my way up, so I'd been much more the typical academic.
Right.
He had been the fundraiser for the university and had completed a $1 billion campaign and had gotten the largest gift to a public university, which was the Walton funds going there. So I loved working with him at Arkansas because I learned about fundraising, critically important.
Yep.
And I went to Toledo to be a president. And, I can tell you I hadn't been to Toledo, Ohio. It is cold, right? It's cold. But it was a smaller university. It's 20,000 students. It's a comprehensive research university. It has a law school, had a med school. It's got a hospital. So I had all of that.
All of that in
reporting
20,000?
At 20, yeah. So I had all of that reporting to me. So for me, it was kind of a great place to try it all out and be in charge. And we did some wonderful things. So that particular school, we increased research funding, we increased enrollment, increased fundraising. Doing all those things. And there I did hire their first vice president for diversity and inclusion. And whereas you wouldn't think of Toledo and Charlotte, there aren't a ton of similarities. They are both wonderfully diverse cities. And in my mind, the university needs to embrace and recognize and continue to move forward the diversity of the community around it. And so, that was critically important. And you probably know I came here and I think a month on the job, appointed a special assistant to the chancellor for diversity and inclusion.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you very much. And we've actually now started the national search for that position permanently. The woman who is serving in that role, Dr. Cheryl Waite-Spellman, has been a faculty member in our School of Social Work.
Right.
And so she said, Sharon, I'm going to continue to do this, and then I'm going to step away. So we've just started a national search for that
Great.
position.
Great.
Yeah.
How have you set certain goals for that office, or even maybe on reflection in Toledo, what were the challenges and how did you approach them in terms of diversity?
Yeah, well, so in both places, Cheryl and her diversity council here are working on a diversity plan, and that should be continued to be worked on over the summer, and by fall we'll at least have that framed up. And in some ways, kind of the timing's perfect because we'll have done measurement and input and have all that, and then someone new will come in and say, okay, I'm going to just run with this, or I'm going to tweak a few things, right?
Right.
And at Toledo, and again, you can sort of think about timing, and timing is important. I came here right after the George Floyd, his
Yes,
death, and I
yes.
was in Toledo really as the Black Lives Matters movement started. So both were critically important, and it was important for the university to support students, faculty, staff, the community, and make sure that the campus felt there was a voice coming into the highest level.
Right.
So the position,
Which is really important.
the position on our campus sits at the cabinet level and reports directly to me. And I think our campus felt that that was really important to have somebody who is really doing that.
Right.
So, I mean, we haven't, and you probably know, our council would say you can't have targets, you can't have numbers, but what we know is we want to continue to make progress. And
Right,
I
right.
think that's what our goal is to continue to see incremental positive movement in what we're doing, and then make sure that in all ways what we're doing is reaching out into the community. One of the things when I got here and learned about the Shetty study that was done back in, and if it was
Yes.
2015 timeline, and that Charlotte was ranked last in terms of social mobility. I mean, part of that is our role as the public research university here is we have to help in our community's social mobility. We have to affect change. So,
Right.
I think all of this sort of helps to shape this institution and how we play a part in Charlotte.
So I'm going to get to the question of how we engage the community, because there are some tricky dimensions to it. And after 75 years, UNC Charlotte we still have some distance involved, but we also are looking for making structural changes so that we can be better at connecting to our community. I will say, and I didn't say this when we first met, that one of the reasons I stayed here as long as I have is that it's a public institution that values access, and with access comes the question of diversity.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
so it's been very much at the forefront of my own interests and persistence in looking for ways that I could bring architecture into that conversation.
Right.
It's not just an economic conversation, not just a social work conversation, not just a health or education conversation, but arts and design play a critical
Absolutely.
role. And so I think that part of my agenda has always included those subjects. So let's talk a little bit about, because you've talked about Rural Studio and you've talked about the community design work at Arkansas. What do you see as some of the challenges? You've only been here a short while, I get that, but maybe, okay, so let me reframe it. What do you see as some of the methods that you have experienced that most effectively connect a university to a community?
Yeah, I appreciate your sort of thinking about it, because I was thinking And I've only been here a short while, and I've only been here during the pandemic.
Yes.
Which
you don't
means,
get to go
right. I have
greet
this,
everybody and have lunches and yeah.
And I haven't seen really the way we truly operate in a normal time period.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Which is really difficult because, you know, I was thinking about, and I'm going to bring it back to architecture, part of what I think people love, even if they're not architects, or if they don't really understand it, first of all, they love opportunities to see it and learn. As somebody says, you know, I can remember my first walking tour of a neighborhood, and it's like, these are craftsman bungalows. These are, you know, and it's like, oh, okay. I mean, in Los Angeles, what did I, you know?
Right.
So just thinking about having people who aren't steeped in a design background. But the other thing I was going to say that, you know, our community thinks about is just being able to see our students or designers in the process of doing that. And I think about when studios are visible, you know, either through a glass window or when they're open, or, I mean, and you know, it could be my bent, right, as a planner, but I am just fascinated. I kind of think the general public loves seeing the design process as it progresses. So to think about how we become more visible, it's very interesting. You know, I have the good fortune of being here now, and my predecessor was fortunate enough to have the light rail connect to this campus, which means we can get to Uptown easily, which means we can get in. I can't even imagine what it was back in the day when that didn't exist, and we were considered so far out of Uptown and so far out there, and you know, it's like it's 8 miles, but so now we have this wonderful opportunity with the Center City building, with the light rail, to continue to think about what that connection looks like, and whether we even think about ways that we, at some point, open ourselves up through even an open house or a something that has the opportunity to draw people in to see our world a little bit more.
Right.
And you know, I'm going to give 2 quick examples, and both were at Auburn, interestingly enough. At Auburn annually, the vet school would do an open house and invite everybody in Alabama to come see what the vet school was doing. And I mean, thousands of people would show up because they'd do demonstrations, and they'd show them fundamentals of the science that goes into this. And so you think about that from architecture and just opening it up and having people think about, how do you look at that, and what happens when the sun moves and what that does to a building. And I mean, I actually had that conversation with our athletics director about the sun in the stadium and what does that look like. And he's like, I hadn't, you know, that was kind of interesting because others think about that probably more than he does necessarily. But then the other example of inviting people in was every year at Auburn, the architecture school there actually hosted a pumpkin design and carving competition. There'd be 200 pumpkins that were designed by students and others, faculty, others, and they'd line sort of this area. And the community came because it was just beautiful. They were illuminated at night, and they were out there. And it showcased the college in some ways. So, you know, along the way, because we're not in the middle of things, I think we're going to continue to think about how we bring people to campus and how we get to, you know, sort of the uptown area and make sure we are doing the connections that we need to do. I've had lots of people come here and they're like, well, I haven't been here in 10 years or 20 years. I had no idea. And it's like, this place is amazing, but we have to probably make sure we're getting people to campus to see it all.
I just had this thought about 200 pumpkins in every window of the Center City building. So
Yeah, well, but even doing it out on the plaza there and thinking about what
That's
that
right,
looks like.
that's
I mean,
right.
it's like kind of an interesting idea. Yeah.
I think this is AIA Charlotte, and so I have to describe a bit that we have very active partnerships with AIA Charlotte and the School of Architecture. We just finished building a project called The Porch on Tuckasegee Road, which is a community gathering spot. Through funding from AIA North Carolina, we have done work on the west side, illustrating housing opportunities and community development opportunities. And I'm sure we're going to continue that with both the local chapter and the state, the local section and the state chapter. Those are very important, and I think AIA National has really brought some initiative to the state chapters and trickled down to the sections as to how that can work. We do operate a city building lab in and attached to our urban design program. And we're doing a number of things through my colleagues, Nadia Anderson. We do an augmented reality program with GIS through the urban design program. So there's a lot of things. I keep forgetting that you've only been here a really short period of time.
Well, and I look forward to sort of learning all of that and seeing it, and just because it hasn't been a normal time period.
Yes.
You know, somebody told me I'm like a red shirt freshman. I'm kind of in there. I've got the drills going, but I haven't been able to do it, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Alumni are always important.
very much so.
And I know the School of Architecture is having its 50th anniversary next year, and there's a whole bunch of planning going on related to that. But the university, I think, is reaching 75 years. And so, how do you feel a university best? You know, everybody complains that the only time you talk to your alumni is when you're asking for money, but there are a lot of other ways that alumni are involved. And through the recent capital campaign, alumni have shown a great willingness to participate in fundraising. Are there things on the horizon in your mind, from your experience, that touch alumni in particular ways?
I believe that we're going to continue to enhance what we're doing with our alums over time. And, you know, I've during COVID had the opportunity to talk a little bit to the Alumni Association. I think the deans will all continue to think about how we connect. Your point is we have to.
We do.
And there's a number of reasons. I mean, obviously for our students, for internship, for job opportunities, but you know, you know better than I do. I mean, our alums participate in crits and, you know, activities and projects and this sort of thing. So we're going to want even more of that. And I think what we were talking about before, even with sort of thinking about collaborative connections, because, you know, many of our outstanding, successful alums who are part of AIA are thinking about, okay, how do we connect with somebody who's going to think about whether it's a well building or whether it's different aspects of sustainability, or, you know, what does the next iteration of that look like? We have to keep innovating along the way. So I think there's lots of great opportunity, and, you know, part of, if we continue to say that we are this area's great urban research university, we're the ones to connect with, because we know we've got the innovators that are here thinking about what that next generation looks like. And I think that's what I would stress is, I want our alums to make sure they're looking at us as a resource and a partner. And yeah, there'll come a time when we'll come back and ask for, you know, make sure you're contributing to us, make sure you're voting for us or ranking us in design intelligence. All of that matters reputationally. I mean, I've given the example, U.S. News and World Report, and you probably know this, one element of their ranking of universities is what is your undergraduate alumni giving percentage?
Right, yes.
And
yes.
it's not telling everyone to give $1 million each. It's saying everyone needs to give something each year. So if it's $10 or $100 and or $10,000, all of that matters because it matters in that element of it, and it just talks about engagement. So all of those are parts. But I think part of what we are going to continue to want to do is how do we bring together these collaborative, cross-disciplinary groups? Not that architecture shouldn't work alone, but that we know that there are talents that you're going to want to bring in, and that there are opportunities there.
Right. So let's turn a little bit to the work of architects. As you know, I've been here a long time. I've seen a lot of buildings go up.
Yes.
Your predecessor had the quote-unquote luxury of getting to build a lot. The physical environment of the campus has changed quite dramatically. So are you getting any sense, either from the state, through the legislature, the Board of Governors, or your own reading of the campus in terms of the physical environment? What do we need to do next?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I do know right now from the Board of Governors and the legislature, the general feeling is that they're going to focus on renovation as opposed to new construction. And I'm optimistic that we may get some resources in this next fiscal year to be able to do some renovation work. I mean, we've got the science building on campus that is nearing completion.
Right.
We are waiting for an appropriation of resources to be able to operate it.
Oh, yes.
So
there's always that
there is that detail,
methodology.
right? So that's one. But as I'm hearing, I think that's coming forward pretty. If it's not already been signed, it's coming forward. So we
Good.
should be able to make sure that that's ready for the fall. And everybody hopefully knows that the Marriott Hotel and Conference Center just opened right on campus up in the engineering area. So that's pretty excited. It's
right next to the light rail stop.
Yes, it's connected to the light rail, and
100
that's
feet or something like
which
that.
is perfect. So if people want to come and have lunch there and go back, and it's a great way to take the light rail and check it out. And so for us, that's exciting because we have had all of these opportunities for growth. Short term, I don't have a plan for next buildings, in part because my predecessor did a wonderful job of building
the
a lot.
opportunity, yeah.
I'd say longer term, and when I say long term, and is that 5 years? I don't know. It might be 3, right? But I think there's going to be the question of, if we continue to grow in our research portfolio, what does that look like in terms of our space needs? What does that look like for anything that is research related? And then we have been growing in terms of enrollment. We saw during the pandemic some of that slowed down a little bit. I think we're going to remain sort of constant. Our growth rate may have slowed a bit, but it also means there's going to come a time when we're going to need more space if we continue to grow just a little bit. Of the schools in the UNC system, so there are 17 schools in the UNC system, our campus followed by, Wilmington has the greatest space need, and we are second in that list. So
On a per student basis?
Correct. We've got the smallest sort of footprint per student of any of the campuses. Wilmington is at the top of that, smallest, and we're second smallest of the 17. So it suggests that we will need space, but I can't tell you when that's going to happen, and I can't tell you when they're going to say, here's money for new construction, because this year they have really specifically said, we're not advocating new construction.
Yeah, I've been thinking since the draft strategic plan has been broadcast that the space needs for a university of 30,000 students defined as an R1 high research level institution are very different than merely the number of students
Right.
who you're teaching.
Right.
I can give the example to the architects in the group that right now we're taking up an entire design studio in our building on campus for the algae energy production research that's coming out of our integrated design research lab because we don't have room to do that.
Yeah.
And so you start occupying teaching space
Right.
for research purposes, and that kind of push and shove is going to really start affecting the planning process for new construction. I could imagine 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, but you're doing a plan for 10 years, so it has to include that part or else we're not going to get there. Yeah.
Right, and so, I mean, you know, we've got sort of the strategic plan, then we've got the campus master plan. I do know the campus master plan then identifies there are spaces for additional buildings.
Yes.
And then what goes there, what are we thinking about, what's the timing? As we make progress on this, we're going to have to think about that. So when you give the example of algae research, I mean, a lot of schools now are shifting to a multidisciplinary research space that's sort of flexible and
Bravo.
nimble. And I mean, which would be wonderful because it emphasizes and facilitates collaboration and isn't single disciplinary usage, right? So,
Right,
I mean,
right.
so that's an idea, and I'm not saying that's where, you know, that's not on the plans right now, but it certainly is something that I've seen at other campuses that would make a lot of sense, that would help facilitate the type
Right,
of work you're
right.
talking about.
The grant I've been working on for the last 2 years with Dr. Missy Epps in geology and Associate Professor of Art Marek Reynes, if we actually had a space where some of the rock laboratory work and some of the art making work could coexist,
Right.
it would just increase the level of collaboration and creativity. So it would, I mean, that's just one example.
Well, and then I was going to say, and then remember, universities typically, if somebody has a space or a studio or something else, they own it forever. But if it's nimble and it says,
Right.
okay, that project has culminated, maybe somebody else moves in, and then you get in again. So you know, there are lots of possibilities. So.
I'm about to retire, so you don't have to take this seriously, but I've always wanted a second building next to the Center City building for that kind of collaborative work. So let me ask you, you are our first female chancellor.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's a wonderful, it was just glorious to hear of your appointment. You know, how do you see female leadership in higher education? And I have to also put in a long-term statement. Provost Lorden is on this campus. I cannot tell you how lucky you are to have Provost Lorden and as a partner in this endeavor. But you have a long history as well of female administrative leadership in higher education.
Yeah.
How does that happen? And what do you hope to achieve?
Yeah, thank you. And you know, as you said that, I was at Toledo, the first female president there also.
Oh, okay.
So I've had both of these places where I've been the first. And I mean, some of that, again, this wasn't the goal. It just happened to be what I wound up. And part of what I know now is when you're given that opportunity, I want to make sure I work hard, do a great job, and pave the way so that others have that opportunity in the future.
Right,
and
right.
I've watched enough of higher ed to know if you mess it up, a woman's not going to get hired for a while, so I better do a really good job, because there's sort of what's the flip side? This
right.
campus has had, you know, I recognize I follow Chancellor Dubois, and he did great work, but Provost Lorden has been here a long time and has done excellent work, and it is pretty amazing to think about somebody, you know, being a provost for, I think it's 17 years, if I'm something
Close
like
to
that.
that.
Yes.
Close to that.
And you know, that's not that doesn't happen by chance.
Right.
That's a lot of hard work and navigating, and part of what I think Joan's talent and hopefully my talent is listening and hearing and taking the multiplicity of interests and making sure we're collecting that and doing the right thing to move things forward. And I certainly see that in our provost, and I do know that that's part of what I think is who I am, and part of as a planner. And I always view planning as this sort of interdisciplinary thing that draws
That's nice to hear.
from design and geography and politics and sociology, and it comes together, and you have to appreciate all of those different perspectives to recognize this is how we're going to do something. So in some ways, that's my fundamental educational background, and kind of the way I operate then to make sure that we're able to do that and hear the different voices in the group. I think, I talked a little bit about bringing in a special assistant for diversity and inclusion. I would say part of what I recognize is that our leadership, our campus, our faculty, our leadership needs to reflect our community. And, as the first woman, I recognize that, half our student population is female, and it's a great thing for them to see. We didn't talk about this before, but so I have 3 kids, two girls and a boy, and the older 2 are my girls. And so when I was first named as a chancellor, and my daughter says, "I don't understand the first," and I'm like, "That's the way it is. This is that's," and these are 20-somethings that I have, and I mean, in their generation, the understanding is you can and you should and you're able to do whatever it is. That's the expectation. And in mine, yours, that hadn't always been the expectation.
Right.
So, I just have to leave it, kind of like leaving the earth better than it was when you got here. I have to leave the campus better than it was when I got here.
The Department of Music annually participated with Charlotte Symphony in an event at the oldest African American owned nightclub east of the Mississippi called the Excelsior Club. It's been closed a few years. We hired the first African American faculty member in the music department, who is a vocalist, and he participated in one of these programs. And one of the most famous attorneys in Charlotte involved in civil rights, Mr. Ferguson, is the owner of Excelsior Club. And so I went up to him and I said, "We've now brought the first African American member of the music department to participate." And when he introduced the program, he said, "There's no end to firsts.
Right.
There's always going to be a first." And tonight we have the first African American faculty member in the music department. We now have more, so it's good. I don't know. We wrote some questions, but thinking back about women in leadership roles, particularly in higher education, what advice would you give them? I am very happy. I mean, we haven't reached all our diversity quotas, but we have a whole lot more women and people of color on the faculty at UNCC than when I first got here on a percentage basis. What advice would you give women or people of color as they approach these decisions about their career?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because I think, especially you think about the tenure track and you think about, is there a family? Is there, it just depends on what their life situation has. Sometimes faculty positions, just like professional positions, you try to do everything in your 20s and 30s and 40s, and there's life. And I think what I'd say is make sure you maintain balance and make sure you explore options. It's letting people know you're interested in whatever range of opportunities. So if the department or the university or your firm has training or leadership development or interesting opportunities, I think women sometimes wait to be recognized as opposed to say, hey, I might be interested in that. I'd love to participate. And I do think that is sort of a gender difference that, and I can say my young self probably was there too. Like, if I just work hard, people will see I'm a really hard worker. But all of us, and I don't know that it's a male-female thing, although I think that men will often say, I'm interested in participating in that a little more frequently. All of us need a senior person to say, you did a great job, I'd like to move you forward and see if you'd be interested in this opportunity also.
Great.
And I think, in your role previously as dean, in my role, we have to continue to facilitate those opportunities for people. So that's the part of senior people. But I also want to encourage women. I want to encourage, architects of color or faculty of color to say, I'd be interested in that leadership opportunity also. And, you don't have to sit and say, I'm going to wait for, if I keep my head down, somebody will notice, because it's a crowded field, right? We know that. So it's just being bold enough to sort of make sure people see what the great skills and talents that you have.
Right. So one thing that Malcolm brought up in the introduction was, and AIA Charlotte is 1,000 licensed architects strong. There's
Right.
another 1,000 people working alongside them, and there's 2,000 or 3,000 more people working in development, construction, real estate, et cetera, et cetera. As an industry, or in specifically the field of architecture, what are ways that they might better be connected to this university?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I'd love to, I have to think about it even more, but I do think coming to campus, participating in whether it's crits, charrettes, activities that we have, guest lecturing, allowing student classes to take, for professional practice, to take tours of their offices to see what's going on. I mean, all of those sorts of things, and you think about them. Then to think about, if they've got a particular thing that they're working on, building a new stadium somewhere for something, allowing a class to see and be exposed to that. Because what it's going to do is continue to create the connections, and hopefully then the firm will think about hiring our students, bringing in interns, wanting to do more things. I think for everything we do as this city's public urban research university, I want the city to embrace us.
Right.
And not to look, I recognize lots of people got their degrees somewhere else.
Sure.
And there are people, yet we're the ones here. We want to help. We want to help with talent and innovation and new ideas and all of those great things. So we want to be fully embraced here in the community.
Yeah.
And so if somebody's
Great.
got an idea on that, that's what we want to hear.
You're going to get a
also.
lot of letters from people.
Okay, well,
afterwards, after this event. Yeah, I don't think my colleagues are shy about making suggestions. And I will say, just again, because you've been here a short period of time, the range of programs we have with AIA Charlotte are tremendous. The active student chapter, active mentoring program, active integrated path to architectural licensure, all kinds of internships.
Yeah.
I at one time remember saying that 50% of our students had part-time jobs and internships with the profession.
Wow.
It's
Okay.
one of the great draws of this place.
That is great.
With this many practitioners, our students have tremendous opportunities, and they do take advantage of them because they know that will accelerate their own path.
Excellent.
What do you do for fun after all of this, Sharon?
Well, again, it's been a strange year, right? So, things outside are really what I enjoy, and it's part of what I'm loving about being in Charlotte. So, you know, I walk my dog on campus. I will play tennis or pickleball when the opportunity exists.
Do we have a pickleball court on campus?
I have not found one, so
Oh,
I
that's-
don't know.
you're gonna replace the
that could
green
be,
behind
there
the
you
house.
go. That could be. Yeah, there's a putting green in the
That's right.
backyard. That's not my. I've got to work on that, right?
Okay.
And you know, I don't know if you saw this. You know, there was a photo showing me with an electric scooter. You know, doing a scooter tour with students. I actually own my own.
Oh.
So that's mine because I enjoy scooting around and just checking things out. So
So we're going to see Chancellor Gaber on a
yeah,
scooter
yes,
on campus?
Yes, yeah.
That's great.
And you know, going back to the idea of touring,
Uh-huh.
have you actually been on Tom Hanchett's bus
I have
tour
not.
yet?
See, no.
Sponsored, I think, still through the Community Building Initiative,
Okay.
Diane English's
Yeah.
kind of
Well,
effort.
see, I need to.
I doubt Tom's on this event, but good friend of mine
Okay.
personally, and great professional colleague. And I don't know any new person on this campus that hasn't come back from that tour without having their eyes opened as
No,
to
I
what
would
this
love it,
faculty
'cause that's
or what this
sort of-
town is. Yeah.
Sort of the way and you know, you can imagine, just like you all look at cities, I look at cities and I think, oh wow, okay, how that's connected. You know, so
Well,
I
his
love
is
it.
special
Okay.
because it's the whole city and not
Yeah.
just, you know, it's not just the real estate tour, it's the
Yeah.
whole city.
Good.
So,
Good.
Malcolm, I don't know if you've got questions from the audience, but I guess I can turn it over.
We do have a few, and I want to thank you both. This has been fantastic. I'd encourage maybe to take a sip, and then I've got a couple of questions.
That's a good idea.
We can do that on camera. But we've taken the conversation, and I know that you and I have talked to Ken about some of these questions, and I know that you all, the two of you, had a conversation prior to. So it was fantastic to sort of hear and have you have the opportunity to have given those some thought. And so maybe I'll apologize that not all of these are questions that you may have heard, but I think I'll try to relate them as best we can. And Ken, you can help me there. But maybe on a lighter note, just knowing that your time has been short with us, Chancellor, what still have you been able to find about our built environment here that's either memorable or inspiring to you and to your family?
Well, I think there's both the built environment on campus and then in the broader community, obviously.
Sure.
I've spent a fair amount of time in uptown area. I've spent a fair amount of time in various business offices uptown. I just think it's I mean, what's inspiring, I think the city is well connected, especially when you are uptown and look at, and I've been in, you know, I don't know what floor it was, 36th floor of, you know, building, looking out and sort of seeing the whole thing and trying to see where we're located from that vista. So I guess I love and again, I've been here at different times, sort of the vitality of being in the uptown area and seeing what's going on. It is nothing like it will be. I know I've had plenty of people tell me, well, get ready for traffic because you're not seeing it yet. So, you know, okay.
That's true.
Yeah, so I just think, I mean, so you've got sort of the built environment and then we've got the natural environment. And I've gone to a number of county parks and gone and taken walks and taken the dog there and do all. It's really a nice mix because it's not all built everywhere. And, you know, I say that because I've got two kids who live in New York City. So, so you know, I go and visit them and I know it's building, and then there's sort of Pocket Park, and then there's Central Park. But this is a wonderful mix of communities together. So I obviously still have to spend a lot more time exploring just and understanding what it's like in a normal time period.
Yeah. Well, I know Ken would agree that we count our area as being sort of an hour and a half to 3 hours away from so many different things, either into the mountains or out to the coast, Charleston and North Carolina coast and so forth. And unfortunately, as he's mentioned several times, you've been here sort of during the pandemic only,
Yeah.
and maybe not had the chance to explore as much. And so certainly our members influence
Yeah.
space and architecture throughout the region, and not so much to a building, but to a place. If, once things sort of break down and get back to normal, where you think you'd like to go?
I want to go everywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what I would tell you, just that I was sort of looking, somebody gave me a book on, things to do in the Charlotte metro area, and it was festivals and events and things and activity. And, of course, none of them have occurred during,
Right.
okay, it's February. What does that say? Oh, there would be a nice festival. So,
Right.
I mean, it's a great way to see different communities. I just haven't had that opportunity. So, I've gone to restaurants in different areas and sort of tried to understand. And every time I'm driving somewhere, if there's someone who is from here in the vehicle, I'm like, okay, what neighborhood am I in? Because that design aesthetic is very different than where we just were, right? So
Right.
I think it'll be just great to sort of learn and understand how it works in a normal time period.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. We've heard a lot today about the aspirations for the campus in research. And we know that there have been great strides in recent years sort of around that space. And we also know that there have been a number of upstarts, I guess, that have been spawned through the campus's research initiatives. Competing universities, partner universities in the state like North Carolina State, Chapel Hill, and others have made great strides sort of beyond their shores to sort of partner with corporations.
Yeah.
Noting the idea from yesteryear of sort of the Charlotte Research Park area, what early thoughts are happening on the campus about how those partnerships might be forged again?
Yeah, we have various partnerships. I was on a call earlier today with Honeywell, and our career center was talking to them, and we've talked to people with Centene that are coming. So I want this community to fully embrace this university and sort of the range of strengths that we have. I think it's part of what we have to do is make sure we are reaching out fully. And, I'm really proud of the alums from UNC Charlotte that are out in C-suite, executive level offices in a range of institutions throughout our community, and really have helped us continue to have strong connections and entree.
I see.
And I do think that's a real plus. I mean, and I look at, banking community, real estate community, healthcare. I mean, we've got people in executive level positions in all of these sectors.
Right.
But I do want to think about, the industry that has come to town recently, Centene and Honeywell a few years ago. I want to make sure they know who we are and make sure that they're recruiting here and that our students have those opportunities. And, so that's part of what we have done to reach out. We will be starting a new sort of corporate relations office this summer that's going to help be a kind of a one-stop shop place, so that if a company or industry or business or even a sole proprietor says, I want to talk to somebody about hiring, or I want to talk to somebody about a research project, or a professor about this idea I have, this office will help be the place that can funnel it and get the connection. Because I've had a lot of people say to me, well, I'd like to do something with UNC Charlotte, but it's so big, I don't even know where to go. So
That's a very true statement. I have a friend who is the head of Toyota Racing Development's aerodynamics.
okay,
He asked me, how do I connect to computing?
yeah,
And I called up the College of Computing Informatics. They're now in a 2 or 3 year
yeah,
really transformative relationship on computer modeling on the aerodynamic side of Toyota racing development, which is not just NASCAR, it's across the whole fleet of Toyota, which is a pretty big sector of the automotive industry.
So you're saying you're interested in the position? Because I'm going to have an opening.
Right.
Because that's what we want, is somebody who says, yeah, I'm going to make sure we have that connection, whether it's to that college, to the, this. But right now, people lots of times don't know who's that phone call.
They don't. Yeah. And I had to know that Bill Talone was the person who would not do the work, but know how to get the work done appropriately and take the time to kind of talk with each other at Toyota over time. So it's a really critical issue. I think universities, by and large, are very opaque, and they pretty much have their quote-unquote own agenda, and oftentimes they don't look over the wall or even over their nose. So it's a really big, and it's an exciting time for lots of different reasons: design, technology, human relations, and then the part that addresses the community needs, health and education, and the cultural sector, and it's a really there's a lot of needs, a lot of needs. Yeah.
Well, this next one is for both of you, and it's interesting, some of the things you've said about sort of these collaborative opportunities that really the School of Architecture has taken both with our industry but also on the campus. We have a question from a recent graduate of the school who talks about and was listening to you speak to the strategic plan and other aspirations for the university, and he wants to know sort of how and if the School of Architecture might be involved with that planning and that thinking as a group, but then also influencing a bit more, and this is a perennial student question, influencing the aesthetic and some of the architecture for any new structures on campus. So you've got that history.
That one's aimed at me, Sharon. Geez, I can think of 15 former students who would ask that question. I mean, there is a part that would be aimed at the chancellor, which has to do with how architects are chosen to work on campus and what the aspirations of those projects are. I think that first of all, one part of the question has to do with strategic planning, and I know that people in the School of Architecture, people in the College of Arts and Architecture have been at the table and involved in the strategic plan in the central committee. And for those listening, that person's Jose Gamez, who's the new Associate Dean of Research and Graduate Programs in the College of Arts and Architecture. So embracing the R1 goal and looking for opportunities to connect faculty, not just within the College of Arts and Architecture, but across campus. We now have a person, and I never had that person during my deanship. Dean Muller of the College of Arts and Architecture has brought it not just to the college strategic plan, but I think to the university, both experience and expertise, but also an insistence on sustainable design principles being a more central part of the campus's development. I do believe that will change some of the characteristics of the buildings and of the challenge to the firms that are brought on, whether or not it's new construction or renovation. All of you architects know that a renovated building is the most sustainable solution to the built environment. And so I think to hear Chancellor Gaber talk about the emphasis from the state funding perspective on renovations really creates a new set of opportunities. And I know all the old buildings on campus, and I know a whole bunch of things that we might be able to do to those. Whether or not, no chancellor, this is to get you off the hook. No chancellor has the opportunity to sort of transform the aesthetic of a campus. I have always shared with folks the goal that the architecture of individual buildings should match the aspirations of what happens inside. That's doesn't always happen, because sometimes we get exteriors that are predetermined. But I think that's going to be a challenge for any chancellor to have. And we have developed a high degree of cohesion, a high degree of uniformity. Not everybody wants that. I will admit that, but it's what we have, and it's what you get to work with.
Right.
So those are my perspectives on that question. I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, and not having had another building coming, it is very interesting to think about what that looks like and what the process is. And it's interesting, as you say, we do have a high degree of uniformity, and so Auburn is similar with a high degree of uniformity, whereas Arkansas is very different and has really different, interesting, aesthetically buildings. And so I think about the oldest building on campus, which is a very traditional building, is next to the College of Architecture, which, it's the Fay Jones School of Architecture, which has a Marlon Blackwell addition, that renovation that was just done. And together, it's just so interesting to see. So very different. Mm-hmm. And we'll have to see what we do here going forward. I think, given what has been here to date, it sort of is predictive probably of where we'll be going. But we'll figure it out as we go.
Right.
Yeah.
It was amazing to hear you speak to sort of leadership strategies, particularly for women and minorities. And Ken pointed out some of the programming that we've had in place for quite some time. But specifically, we have a Women in Architecture group that is very robust, has had lots of energy, great job, great meetings and so forth. And they continue to thrive, and I would love to have you share more of those notes at some point with that group. But on the leadership front, they spun out a leadership initiative in class this year, and it was the first one. But more broadly, we've had a leadership institute for now 2, 3, 4 years. And so through that, sort of it's bringing along and pulling along other new candidates into the profession. Right. But I also wanted to point out, and I think you referenced this, that the notion of being in positions of leadership and recognizing those in the room that may be sort of quiet or uncomfortable with bringing forth their thoughts and ideas, it's important for those leaders to be able to recognize that, as someone probably did for us, and to be able to tap that and encourage them to kind of pull their chair up to the table. So I applaud that, and I applaud the fact that you've been able to tap someone to sort of explore and emphasize diversity on the campus. Another question that has come up sort of collectively from our group speaks to sort of the planning and design projects not being the only thing and only contributor to both the campus and its shores, but how else, given the conversation that's happened, would you think that the AIA membership and our partners could be of help and assistance to the university?
Well, I think the other thing that the university's thinking about is how do we get students, particularly students, and we've talked about students of color, students perhaps from Title I high schools that have not had opportunities, students that are first generation, how do we get them to even think about going to the university? And as you talk about how might you do that, it's being in the grade schools, the high schools. I mean, we do some of that, but the more that students are exposed to opportunities. So I don't know, and again, new, so I don't know what you're doing in high schools or middle schools to say, this is an opportunity. And by the way, you would want to go to college to do this. Here's a great school that has this as an opportunity. I think we're going to continue to focus on that. We talked about that's part of our mission is we are proud to say that we're accessible and affordable. Right. And, I think about our tuition here is very affordable. But I think as much as we're out telling that story, we need practitioners to be out saying, hey, I'd like to come to, whether it's an art class, whether it's a class about the environment, whether it's a class that says, let's talk about buildings, because it's what begins to spark children's interest in, thinking about this. And, you were sort of asking, what is it that led you to want to be a planner? I still remember a 4th grade project where I was asked to go out and map my street. Now, I became an urban planner. I'm out there drawing doing a street, a site map effectively, and in 4th grade, having every house and I've got this thing, and I thought,
Was it to scale?
yeah, probably not, although, at this point, that's a great question. But I mean, those sorts of things to spark imagination and to think, this is in fact what I could do. And I'm confident we're doing some of that. I think as our city continues to grow, we all have to think about how do we continue to do it, because we're not reaching every junior high and high school age kid. And we want to, because we want them to know this is an opportunity and this is a possibility. And by the way, then you do this and become an architect or a planner, you're changing lives and you're changing the way people live in their communities and the way they see their community. I mean, it's just so amazing to think about all of those things. But I think that's a way, and whether it's we partner with y'all or you do it and then say, and here's a great place that you could think about going, but it sparks the imagination.
Absolutely. Well, I think we'd be very honored and interested in joining and partnering with you with that. I'm going to let that be the last word.
All right.
And I want to thank both of you for just what I had, more than I guess I had ever dreamed of this conversation being. And I hope that the two of you have been able to get to know one another a lot better.
We have.
We have.
That's nice.
Absolutely.
It has definitely served that purpose.
Thanks so much for
Thank
taking
you.
this time.
Yeah.
Happy Mother's Day, by the way.
Thank you.
And to our members who are out there, we so appreciate you all joining us, inspiring these kinds of conversations. We've talked a lot, particularly since the outset or onset of my presidency this year, about sort of having other conversations and having our members venture into the tents of other organizations throughout the region and inviting them into ours. We look at those as continuum conversations, being that there's a continuum of ideas and thinkers that surround us. And we want to continue that even beyond my leadership here to make sure that the organization continues to matter in the eyes of others out there, and that we let you all know that you matter so much to us and the work that we do. We sort of can't exist without each other. And so with that being the final note, we've got 2 minutes left, and this being the Zoom and virtual world, we're going to stop here. And again, we thank you. If you have follow-up questions or whatever, please send them to us. And look out for our next activities, which we hope will include a building tour or two over the summer. And we so appreciate you all as members participating, hanging with the organization during the pandemic, and continuing to support us, your clients, and the region and city. Thanks so much, and have a good day.